Hello again, everybody. This is Steve coming to you with another episode in my Intro to Writing series. This time it's about building characters for your stories and giving them depth. So this also includes balancing them, as I've touched on in other series, which is also a very important part of this. Because if you don't have a good balanced character, you're going to have somewhat of a lopsided or shallow character, one or the other, sometimes both. Anyways, the first thing you need to do when building your character is to give them a name. That's the very, very first thing. To some of you it might sound like this is putting the cart before the horse as far as designing a character, but actually, you'd be surprised how much of an impact that name will make in your design of the character and how people view them. Like, for example, with certain limited exceptions, you can't expect someone named Spike to be some petite little girl in a ballerina dress. I mean, you can, but that's usually like if you're doing comedy or parody or something. Because like when you hear Spike as a name, your mind is immediately drawn to a picture of some big, rough and tumble, grizzled, possibly scarred and tattoo-covered punk rocker or biker gang type person. Because Spike goes perfectly with that kind of personality. It does not go well with the little girl in the ballerina dress, like I say, unless you're doing parody. For a real-life example, think about Dog the Bounty Hunter. I mean, when somebody says that name, what do you picture? See what I mean? You're picturing this big biker dude with tattoos. So, and the name does a lot to set the initial mental picture of the character. And it also sets a foundation for that person in the reader's mind and yours as well. So that's one reason why the name is so important right off the start. Because you think of it like a seed or a root system that you're planting, and that's where you start at, and then you start building upward with your character tree. The next step is to begin drawing up the design of the character themselves. And as a bit of a note, in this, as I'm writing this down. Sharing this with you. As I'm sharing this with you, I want to reiterate that you need to write down everything you do with the character design. Journal it all. Be very nitpicky, be very detailed, just go overboard in your notes. Trust me, you will thank yourself later. And even if you don't use all of those notes in the end, at some point you will use at least a fair portion of those. And if you don't record everything that you come up with for this character, you'll kick yourself later. Trust me on that. That's like literally every characteristic trait, quirk, like, dislike, etc. Just record it all. Just, like I say, be super verbose with it. As far as how you record that depends on what you're most comfortable with. With some people, it's a voice recorder, which that shouldn't be your end-all solution, because then you have to keep listening to yourself over and over and over again to keep that character in your mind. But it makes a good starting point if it's quicker for you to speak out the ideas and record them into a voice recorder, whatever that is, your phone, a tape recorder. Yes, those still exist, or something else. Record it. That's fine. If that's what you're most comfortable with, if that's how you can get the idea out fastest, do it. But then make sure you translate that to to either a regular notepad, a physical notepad with pens and pencils. You note it on your PC, because like for me, I write it in Notepad. I'm on Linux, so I use KWrite, but it's the same thing as Notepad. And I'll just sit there and I'll just, like make keyboard go burr as I'm writing ideas. So, that for me is the fastest way to get the idea out. I can see it. I can help connect what's in my mind with what's on the page and make sure I have everything perfect. So, but again, use what's most comfortable for you. Like I say, for me, it's a computer. For you, it might be something else. But like I say, whatever that happens to be, have that ready to go whenever the ideas start rolling. Because when the ideas start rolling, you might struggle a little bit at the beginning, but once you get your feet under you, they just come like a flood, and you almost can't keep up with all the ideas. You know, if you have to just kind of throw rough ideas out and refine them later, fine. Just get the idea down. That's a big one. Just get it down on the page. So another thing you want to do when creating the character is sometimes you'll need to just like close your eyes and visualize them. Just picture who this is you're describing, and don't just like write like little footnotes to yourself. Write notes like you're describing it to somebody, because you'd be surprised how, when you try to explain it to somebody, how many more things you will flesh out than if you're just, okay, this is the character, have blue eyes, green hair, etc. If you're explaining it to them, you're going to give more detail, like they have blue eyes from their parents, they're green hairs because they're actually half dragonkin, for example, to go into the fantasy realm, or maybe they have green hair because they're some alien space character or something like that. So like I say, you're writing it as though you're describing it to somebody else, because in your book you're going to be doing the exact same thing. So write it like you're trying to explain who this person is and describe them to somebody else. Once you do that, once you have the, you don't have to have this perfect picture in your head. You want a starting point. From there, once you have your starting point, your starting idea, that's when you want to start building the character, and that's where you start asking the typical questions you'd ask when building a description of somebody. And they're simple questions like, what color are their eyes? Blue, brown, black, slotted, slitted? Okay, slotted and slitted aren't colors, but you get my point. That's going to come along the way. Like, okay, they got black eyes and they're slitted, So, do they have reptilian or cat-like eyes? Which this is important for. That's going to work. It works really well in sci-fi, but it can also be applicable in fantasy. What color is their hair? Do they even have hair? Like most lizard species don't have hair. Same with some fish, same with fish and aquatic species. Now there are exceptions. They're rare, but there are exceptions. So you want to think about that when you're coming up with your character. What is the construction of their face? Is it Asian? Is it even human? If it's not human, is it similar to another species that you can easily pin a description on? Like, for example, it was hawk-like with a tinge of green. That's probably not a great sentence, but you get the idea here. When you're describing their hair, the hair was hawk-like. If you know what that is, you know what I'm saying here. That's why the sentence sounds clunky unless you know what I'm saying. But that was how I would describe the hair of like a certain alien and stuff. And be creative, whatever you want to do. Maybe you say like, well, it looked like their hair looked like it was a mohawk with blue tinges and sparklies and stuff like that. Again, it's how you visualize the character. And these notes aren't going to be something that you're going to put into a book. These are for you. So if the sentences are a little ugly, as long as they get the job done, that's good. And what this does, this sets a baseline. These descriptions set a baseline for the reader to go on without having to go all, without you having to go all Tolkien in your description. And for any of you who have read Tolkien, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Well, basically the way I look at it is, you're going overboard in your description, even though you'll probably only use 10% of it, because you need that full picture to fill in that 10% properly, so that you're not having to info dump on the reader to build the character in their mind that they're working with, or that you're writing about and they're reading about. Once you establish the face, like the eyes, the ears, the complexion, what's their skin like? Is it human like? Is it pasty? Is it dark? Do they have eyebrows? What's their hair look like? What color is it? Once all that's described, you move on to the body. Simple questions like, are they pudgy? Are they muscular and chiseled? Basically, are they built like a brick house? Are they two-legged with two arms like humans, or do they have four legs? Do they have extra appendages like tentacles coming out of their back? Some of you are like, well, that just took an odd turn. I would have to agree, as I'm covering, I'd have to agree as I'm covering the whole range of character types for sci-fi and fantasy. Like I had in Lion in the Wind, there was a mecha who had a great big pack of tentacles on his back. That's that's a legit thing you have to describe to the reader. So that's something you have to think about. Another example that I think was a really great one is if you've ever read Adopted by Humans. That's a really, really good book. If you have not read it, please read it. It's not a book, it's 8 books, but it's a really good series. I've got the first 2 books read already, and I love how he describes the Glamacin. They've got like 2 vertical ears, 3 ears on the side. They've got like, this this, I don't know if it's a multi-chambered heart. Like humans multi-chambered, it's got 4 chambers, but theirs is, I think, like multiple hearts and multiple lungs. I mean, these dudes are built with redundancy in mind, like almost to a fault. But the way he describes it just gives you this beautiful picture, and that's something you're going to want to do when you're building your characters and then later describing them. Now, moving on further, excuse me, going back to the body. What's their torso like? What's their waistline like? Going back to the legs. What's their legs and feet like? Do they have dog-like feet? Do their feet look like Wile E. Coyotes out of Looney Tunes? Are they bird-like? Like in what was it? It was, I believe, Empire Rising from my Earthfleet series. You had the diplomat Nan. He had 3-toed. Well, technically 4 because there's a reverse toe. But he had like a 3-toed foot, like you'd have on a normal heron. And because of the way his foot was, when he walked down the hallway, it was clickety clackety clickety clackety on those tile floors. Plus, the floors are covered with icky, nasty stuff, and he didn't want that on his feet, so he wore a 3-toed slipper. And that's something you have to think about. It's like things like, do they wear shoes? In case of Nan, yes, he wore slippers, and that was because, one, he didn't want to get his feet all nasty because of the stuff that was left behind by the other diplomats. And if you ever read book 2, you'll understand some of what I'm talking about, because when some of those guys walk down the hallway, they leave behind some pretty nasty stuff. And it's not like they do it intentionally. That's just who they are. But like another thing is, like, especially if they're reptilian, do they have webbed feet? Like in the Earthfleet universe, there was the Varnock. They had webbed hands and webbed feet because they're an aquanoid species. What is the skin color of your individual? And I'm not, this isn't meant to be a racist question. It's you're describing who they are to the reader, and it's a legit question you need to ask yourself and then answer. Like, if they're reptilian, is their skin green? Is it blue? Is it an orange haze? Is it a rust color? Like, and if they're aquanoids, is their skin like the typical bluish green of an aquanoid? Aquanoid, by the way, for those that don't know, is it a oceanic fish-like or aquatic species? Now, if you've got an avianoid, like, they're obviously going to have feathers, so you're not describing the skin so much as you're describing their plumage, which that's still the same thing, because you're talking about their exterior. What is their exterior look like? Is it feathers? And if it's feathers, is it white? Does it have colors, etc., etc.? So the skin color, or feather color, scale color, whatever it is, that's an important character feature. Another thing you could look at too is, if their body is not unique, if it's something a little more cliche, like, let's say, goblins, orcs, trolls, if you're on the fantasy side, like aquanoids, like I was mentioning on the alien or sci-fi side, there may be a green reptilian, they're a humanoid, etc., like that. What do they look like? What is their skin like? That's another huge detail. Like, say, for example, you have somebody who has dark-colored skin, but it's really dry and crusty. You may not tell that part to the reader, but let's just say that because of that dry, crusty skin, that person's always scratching their skin, always scratching their arm and their face and stuff, because the dry skin is a constant irritation to them, so they're constantly scratching that off. there's a character item. It's, you know that they have dry, flaky skin. All the reader sees is that they're over there constantly scratching themselves. They don't need to know the dry skin necessarily, but you do so that you can apply it for the other things like I just mentioned. And again, why so much detail with this? The bulk of the detail is for you as the writer. This is your character, so you need to have a full, clear, rock-solid picture of what they look like in your head before you begin. Anyhow, moving on. Another question to ask is, what clothing do they wear? Do they wear clothing at all? Some species just wear a loincloth, and some don't even wear that. Like, if it's an avian species, do they wear clothing? Interestingly enough, the Trepador, which is what species Non is from, they do wear clothing. But natively, if you go to their homeworld, they don't wear clothes. They look like a normal everyday heron, admittedly 7'5", but they look like a normal heron at their homeworld. Now they come down to somewhere else where there's other alien species and there's considerations of modesty and stuff. Now you'll see them dress in cloaks, usually like cloak and a full-length gown. If you look up on my wiki and you look at the character of Non and you see how some of them dress, they dress that way not because of who they are, because on their world, walking around in, a la naturel is completely normal because they're covered in feathers. But you go into, like one of them goes into, say, an ambassadorial meeting or something, they're wearing full clothing, diplomatic garb, because, it's not for them, it's for those they're meeting with. It's a matter of modesty. To them, they're not ashamed. They'd walk in, a la naturel and not think twice about it, but, everybody else in the room is going to get a little uncomfortable, so they're wearing a robe, obviously. So that's something you got to think about. Other things like, if they're wearing clothing, is it fancy and formal? Is it dirty and practical? Like, is it leather pants, tunic, a vest, like for a blacksmith, with a leather apron or something to protect your face? If it's a farmer, are they wearing wool pants, shirt, possibly a vest or jacket? Is it dirty? Is it like it's been in the field? Or is it fancy and filled with the odor of cigar smoke and expensive wine? In fact, how do they smell? If none of those fit, do they have a different smell to them? Is it earthy? Is it like flowers? Like they just came in from walking in a field of flowers. Or does it smell like, they're about to walk over and steal your wallet and sell you on the slave market, And even those kind of people have a distinctive smell to them. Lots of alcohol, maybe some other more unsavory things. And another thing is, do they wear a hat? Do they have glasses? In sci-fi, do they have Borg implants? In fantasy, are they a wizard and thus have the typical wide-brimmed pointy hat? And this is just the start of the questions you'll want to not just ask yourself, but answer as well. Again, all of this will be hugely important in your character, and to your character and for your readers as you build them. You build your character. Like I said, this is to help you better cement the character in your mind to make it easier envisioning them as you write. Because the better you see your character, the better you know them, the better you understand them, the easier they are to write, because you can build personalities off of that. You can build characteristics, quips, quirks, things like that. And those little quirks and other strange characteristics are what make different characters so unique. And then and that uniqueness then makes them likable. They're not some cookie cutter, rubber stamped, everybody else is doing it thing. They are unique, in their own special way. Next thing you need to do, which goes back to what I just said, is to establish their personality. And before I go any further, I will reiterate one point. Write deep, detailed, verbose notes as you go along in this process. I can't stress that enough. Don't bullet point. Now, well, if you have to when you're initially putting the character down, you're writing super fast because the stuff's just flowing. Bullet point. That's fine. But when you come back later on, flesh out those bullet points. Don't have just like green shoes as a bullet point and leave it at that. You want to expand that, and you want to, what is the shoe? What style is it? Is it for purposes of speed or elegance? It's like, is it a running shoe? Is it a jogging shoe? Is it something that you would wear like rubber boots on a boat? That kind of thing. That's a detail you need, you need to flesh out with each character. Let me think here. It's okay. Anyways, as stated previously, everything I'm telling you to do is to give them an actual personality. And like when I say give them an actual personality, it's like, okay, what are you saying here? Well, the description of the character plays into the personality. Because when I said give them a personality, that personality is partially built off of what they look like. What they look like, what their species is, what their what their personal likes, dislikes are. Because though, how they dress, how they look is connected, very intimately connected with how they dress. Because like if you got somebody who's more formal, more, noble, stuff like that, they're not going to be running around in a leather a leather vest and leather biker pants. They're going to be out there in a polo or a plaid vest, vest or sweater vest or something like that. They'll be wearing, a dress shirt and tie. They might be wearing a suit. And the personality goes with the outfit and the dress and the attire and their look and everything, and then that plays back to the personality. So you gotta look at it that way. Another thing to look at when you're talking about their personality, are they a severe kind of person? Are they cheeky or snarky? Do they have a very fun personality? Which cheeky and snarky and fun are two different things, believe it or not. Are they quiet and melancholy? Are they by nature a builder or an architect? Are they commander or sorry, I can't say this. Anyways, I'll skip that one. Think of it like a tactician. I'll say it that way. That's a better word. The other one's too hard to pronounce. Anyways, are they a debater or a diplomat? Are they good at mediating? Are they the adventurous type? Another key metric in setting personality is their likes and dislikes. What music do they like or hate? What foods are their favorites? What do they abhor? Are they a teetotaler or a rum binger? Do they drink at all? What are their favorite outfits? Like I say, I've covered some of this already a little bit, but I'm kind of trying to get your mind rolling by just throwing this out here and just giving you examples of things to think of, things to consider, things to contemplate while you're building the character. Like another thing, going back to the shoes, do they have a favorite brand of shoes? Do they wear shoes at all? Again, I reiterate that from before. Do they wear a uniform? If they wear a uniform, are they a military type, or are they like civilian, like a butler or something like that? Is that their employee uniform? What's their uniform typically look like? Do they have a favorite place that they like to go to? If you haven't figured it out already, the depth and complexity of your characters in many surprising ways mirror real life. And I'm saying, again, you do not need to tell the readers the entire details of your character. The majority of this is for you, the writer, because it makes richer, deeper characters. Because like going back to the skin thing, where they had the character had the dry, flaky skin, you don't need to tell the reader that they have dry, flaky skin. The fact that they're constantly scratching themselves, indicates to the reader very subtly with a nuanced touch that they've got dry, flaky skin or something that causes them to constantly need to scratch themselves. So, yeah, and the readers love that. So, in short, basically, though, the more depth you put into your character on the back end, the richer and deeper they will be on the front end, even if only a tiny fraction of what you create actually finds its way into the story. And to show you an example of how this works, or could work, let me run a scenario for you, just as an example of how this might work. let's say your character is in the kitchen and they walk up to a plate on which is sitting a slice of buttered bread. They pick it up briefly, study it, maybe sniff at it, just kind of quickly sniff it, and then set it down again, preferring instead to grab a bowl of cereal, whereas someone else comes in behind them and just destroys that slice of bread like they haven't eaten in weeks. Why is that the case? See, this is something you got to think about. Why did they do that? Well, what if the first character, the one that ignored the bread, happens to hate whole wheat bread, which, let's say that slice of bread is whole wheat. But the person who comes in behind them loves the stuff like it's culinary gold. You're starting to see the difference see what a difference just that one tiny little detail makes. Now you have a motivation behind why they acted the way they did versus just they refused to eat the slice of bread but someone else did. It's richer, it's deeper, there's more color to it. Like why do they hate wheat bread? Were they forced to eat it as a kid? And now they have an antipathy towards it. Now this is things you have to think of when you're just when you're building your character. Do they simply not like the flavor of wheat bread, preferring instead to eat white bread? Because it may not be they hate bread. They may just hate a particular kind of bread. That brings up questions of their history or the history for that individual, which also plays into personalities. Starting to see how all of this ties together. You could ask questions like, what was their childhood like? Do they have physical or emotional scars from that time? Did they lose their parents at a young age? And you're like, how does this have anything to do with bread? You'd be surprised. Ask a psychiatrist. You'd be surprised the connections between everyday things in the lives of individuals. Like, let's say, going back to the wheat bread, somebody had an abusive childhood and their parents forced them to eat wheat bread. But they had a neighbor who was really kind to them and was, very consoling and, oh, I know you're having a horrible life. Here, have a sandwich, but the sandwich is on white bread. See the connection here? This is the things you have to think about. In short, basically, the character's history will play a lot into their current personality, likes, dislikes, behaviors, and more. One's history, that's because one's history does a lot to shape one's present. You should know that in your own life. And, but also, your history is not always what shapes it. Or, shapes your character, but it does have a big impact on that. Case in point from real life, there were two sons of a man who was a raging drunk. I mean, this guy was just the worst kind of drunk you could imagine. One of his two sons became a successful businessman. The other became a raging drunk just like his dad. Why? Well, the successful businessman looked at his dad and made a conscious choice that I will never be like him. The other, instead, fell into the same sewer pit as his dad, just figuring Dad drowned his sorrows in alcohol, so I'll do the same. And that's just one example of possibly thousands, if not more, like little things in a person's history, like the history of your character, that will dictate who and what they are at in the present time frame that you're working in. Excuse me. And I'm only touching on just the tip of what you need to build these characters. I'm here not to give you everything you need to build a character. I'm here to get you thinking, because these characters are yours. You need to build them, describe them, know them, understand them, be able to talk about them as authoritatively as the back of your own hand, or your family, like every little quirk and detail of your mom and dad. Well, you need to be able to describe your characters the same way. These need to be living, breathing people in your mind. And I do admit this does sound like a lot of work just to build one character, but if you're just starting out and this is a whole new thing to you, the verbosity you're going to put into this will do just an amazing amount to help you build those characters and learn the art of character building. And as you grow as a writer and you get better and more experienced at it, you'll quickly learn how to weed out the parts that you either never use or use minimally. And it'll also show you which parts you want to focus on more. At the beginning, do it all. As you go along, learn where you can thin out. What things are important, what things are not important. Like you can have things like their language, their favorite colloquialisms, speech patterns, and so on. So this is getting behind the eyes of the characters so thoroughly that if they were a real real living, breathing person, you could tell every single detail about them. And to a writer, those characters are a living, breathing, actual person, even though they are only on paper. So that's the intimacy you need to generate and build with your characters. And like for me, with me, for example, if you were to start talking to me about my characters from my books, you would legitimately tell me after I got done talking that I sound like I'm talking about a real living, breathing person. And you need to be the same way. If you can get to that level of intimacy with your characters, then you have arrived as an author, or at least reached a level that will really give you, a good, or it'll give you the skill you need to create good characters, and from those good characters, good stories. Because the character drives the story, not the story the character. So the better your character, the better the story, because you'll be able to figure out, does this character work here? How is this and this about the character going to affect the story where it goes? How are they going to react in the situation, etc. In short, if your world isn't alive, with a soul of its own, a life of its own, and a depth of its own, it's just words on a page and nothing more. Your stories need to live, to breathe, to exist with real life reality and depth. And if you can build that, if you can create that, your readers will love it. If you can't, you're doing your readers a disservice. And I hate to make it sound bad like that, but you are. If you don't have good characters, you're not going to have a good story, and you're doing more harm than good. You're not, because you're there, to have fun yourself as a writer, yes, but you're also there to create great stories that other people can enjoy. So the better you do, the better you do what you're creating your characters, the better your story will be, and the better your story is. Sorry there. Better your story is, the happier your readers will be, and that's a huge win. But anyways, that's all I have for this time around. I hope you guys enjoyed that. If you have any questions, concerns, other things like that, feel free to let me know. I am more than happy to talk about this kind of stuff, give you pointers and helpers and other things like that. So, talk to you guys later.